Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. As always, I'm very honored and excited to share with my Worthington City School colleagues around some ideas around implementing effective grading and feedback actions to drive student learning. We're on to webinar 4, core grading actions. And since we've done this 3 times already, jump right into the work. Hopefully by now you have the drill down, the working handout in front of you. We're going to jump right into this conversation around core grading actions. What I mean by core actions are practices and guidelines that are school-wide, even district-wide, that could be adapted, could be implemented much differently across classrooms, but we would all agree on that's our primary focus. So no two teachers would ever have to do the exact same thing, but conceptually we're going to understand what it means to have consistent teacher collaboration, what it means to consistently collaboratively score and analyze student work, and then far too often we erroneously believe multiple opportunities for success mean redundant test taking, having students make up every missing assignment, as opposed to maybe what happens in real life, stipulated second chances. So I'm going to walk us through these 3 here during this webinar. The first one is consistent teacher collaboration, and certainly with the teacher-based team framework that is in place now in Worthington, we're primed to be more consistent around collaborating around grading. What I mean by that is not that should we come together and grade each other's papers or grade papers together, but we will consistently have conversations around what are the things we should be doing related to grading. Are we weighting accurately the evidence we're collecting from students related to rigor levels of assignments? If one teacher's accepting work late, another one isn't. If I bring an assignment to the table and I say, this is what I'm going to use to assess whether or not students understand Pythagorean theorem, probability of a genetic cross, or a quality argument as to what was the main cause of the War of 1812, we should be looking at each other's tasks and assignments and not necessarily agreeing if we would use them. But if what I would use to gather evidence and use for not only an evaluation for my practice, but a grade, and it's something my peers wouldn't, we need to have a conversation. So how often does that need to take place? And I use the metaphor, if I told somebody that I had a cavity and I was brushing my teeth at least once a week, after they backed up a few steps, they might say, Dave, I'm not quite sure that that's brushing your teeth. Really, the American Medical Association is pretty clear. It's twice a day. Once in the morning, once at night. So what would be minimum amounts of teacher collaboration around grading? How often would it take place? Would it take place on a weekly basis? Would there be certain meetings devoted just to that topic? And certainly when we look at our meeting notes and agenda where we can add in, will the student be what student work will be used to identify learning progress? It's a great place to say, would we grade that? And how would we grade or score that? How would we include that as evidence for student learning? Another thing to do is to think about an upcoming unit. And I challenge all the teachers in this listening to this webinar, if I was the parent or any parent walked up to you and said, hey, my son's in your class, you're about to start a unit on fill in the blank, War of 1812, Pythagorean theorem, acids, bases, and salts in chemistry. What does he need to do to get an A or a B? What does he have to demonstrate? And if you give me a good answer, I'll leave you alone. But if not, we have to meet. In fact, might have to meet on your prep period. And only say that for emphasis. Because an answer that I don't think any parent should accept is, well, he has to complete his work and do his assignments. Doesn't tell me anything. What would you respond if that question was posed to you? And so the next time you're in your teacher-based team, what skills and concept do they have to know and be able to do? And then work your way down the list. If they were to get a B or a C+, would they have mastery? What would they have to do and what might they struggle with? What would they be at if they were below mastery but still getting it? And then what would they absolutely positively have to show? And if they couldn't, there's no way they could pass. And I'm going to challenge us to say it's in the quality of the evidence and not the quantity. And if we can't communicate this to each other, especially those of us that teach the same subject, we're going to have a hard time communicating that to our students. And so if we can do this, this might drive what assignments, what tasks are mandatory, and which ones could be optional. And I really want us to think about how we can consider to make our classrooms more efficient. And one thing is simple. I understand students are motivated by points. But what motivates them a heck of a lot more is less work. You demonstrate mastery here, that next task isn't on the table, which means that one really has to show what you know. This might get us thinking more about what we do and how we do it. And again, it's a way to build in that collaboration process in our teacher-based teams. So just a quick reflection. How do you tie mastery evidence into your discussions and how grades can and should be distributed to students based on an agreement of mastery? And that agreement comes from teachers that teach the same course, teachers within the same department, teachers that are vertically aligned. Because what I do in algebra certainly impacts my colleagues who teach geometry. 2 or 3 minutes, have a reflection. I'm going to pause briefly and then move on with the webinar. I'll trust you to pause the recording as long as needed. Welcome back. The next core grading action I want to talk about is collaborative analysis of student work, collaborative scoring. Similar to what I mentioned before, what's a minimum amount of time this needs to take place? And so when we think about that, how often do we need to budget time where we're collaboratively scoring student work and we're taking the names off and we're just scoring it to see how we agree on, did they get it, A, B, C, D, whatever that is. Then another time when we're analyzing student work. It's got nothing to do with the score. What are their misconceptions? What are the things that we can learn from their work for us to do differently? Because at the end of the day, an assessment that we would give students isn't an assessment of their learning. It's an assessment of the effectiveness of our teaching. It's got to drive what we do in our next discussion and conversation around our teacher-based team instructional practices that need to change. And finally, the third core action that I really want us to think about is what I call stipulated second chances. And that is really what happens in life. I hear so often secondary teachers say, we need to get students ready for the real world. Well, guess what? In the real world, there are always stipulated second chances. A few years ago, I got 2 traffic tickets within 67 minutes. I want everyone to know that that's not easy to do. And it's even harder to keep the second one from your wife finding out. So after getting 2 tickets in another state and came back home a few weeks later, I paid them off and thought I was all done. And I got a letter from the Indiana BMV that said, oh, by the way, we did find out about that. Your driver's license is going to be suspended because you've got so many points. Kind of that shocking moment. Then I read the rest of the letter that said, unless in the next 3 months you complete this online course and pay $300 to do so. I finished the online course, and ever since then, I don't have to pull over when it rains. My driver's license is the same as everybody else's. I had to pay a penalty of time and money. What I didn't pay a penalty on was that my driver's license was no longer valid. So what are those stipulated second chances that we can offer students that hold them accountable like we wish? But if we want to teach them resilience, we don't do so by cutting them off, by saying you can't make up this work. You can't complete your assignments. And in the real world, sorry, I went too fast there. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, certainly we know that doctors and lawyers make more money. I understand that. And certainly we are fighting to get more respect in our profession, but they all have multiple opportunities to get their certificate. And someone who passes the bar exam on the 8th try, we call them an attorney. And finally, any quality assessment comes down to 3 points: purpose, evidence, inference. And so sometimes what I hear teachers erroneously believe is that multiple opportunities means infinite retest taking. Every time I give an assessment, I have a purpose and I need to gather enough evidence to make an inference. And if I feel that you've just memorized the answers, well, then I don't have enough evidence to know if you've learned it or just memorized the order of the answers B, C, D, E. So it wouldn't make sense then that we would use the same test over and over just till you get as many of them right as possible. So a stipulated second chance could mean doing a different version. Could be writing a paper instead of taking the test. Could mean a lot of things. Could mean making up the time before or after school or outside of my normal classroom time. The guidelines for stipulated second chance should mean that we don't have to give an automatic makeup for every assessment. Not every assessment is equally important. Some students could make up on a future assessment or on another task down the road, so we don't have to think that it's about making up each and everything in our gradebook, which causes more consternation for teachers and students that's necessary. Later on in one of the future webinars, when we talk about Make It Happen, which stands for Missing Essential Assignments, Extended Chance, we'll talk about how if students miss assignments 1 and 2 early in the semester, we move way down the road, they probably shouldn't make up those early assignments. But maybe they do something additional when we do tasks 8 and 9 that goes deeper into rigor and stays in that topic, in that content area. That's where we see the differences between making up every task and a stipulation that says on a future assignment, you're going to have to do more work. I'll list here just a few that I pulled out of just a quick cut and paste from one of the documents in my book, but teachers allow students to make it up after school. So you want to make up the work, it's got to be on your time, not mine. Parent note could be included, additional work sources. And then that last bullet point, we one of the things that we brought into the Common Core standards that I really think is powerful for secondary is speaking and listening standards. So now I'll let you make up the assignment, but now you got to do it deeper. Now you got to create a presentation, whether you give it to the class or not, but you have to give more than you initially did. And I'm going to add a skill in there. I'm going to add a rigor level in there. What I'm not going to do is add a hoop jumping element that isn't important to you or me as the teacher. So, final quick webinar questions for, actually, this is webinar 4. I apologize, that's actually a typo there, but this is webinar 4. Simple. Reflect on the 3 core grading practices that I mentioned here. Number 1, consistent teacher collaboration around grading within our teacher-based teams. How often, number 2, do we bring student work and collaboratively score it and analyze it and look for student inferences that we can make into their learning that will adjust our practices as teachers in our teacher-based team discussion? The idea of stipulated second chances. Again, not multiple or infinite tries at proficiency, but stipulations to where if students need more time to relearn things, we're going to provide it for them. And we're going to teach them the kind of resilience that you do in real life, is that it might cost you time, it might cost you, for us, more money, but to them, that's their time. What I'm not going to do is devalue your work because it wasn't handed in the first time or wasn't handed in on my timeline. As always, thanks so much for listening and engaging in this dialogue. Please continue to send conversation and questions to me, dave.nagel@corwinlearning.net. You see my cell phone number, and as always, gradingforimpact.com. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.